Well, it's him, you know.
Yeah, right.
Hello, my name is George Pifko. I was born in Brooklyn. I lived in New York the biggest part of my life. About 1939, 1940, I left New York to go to Connecticut to work. We had all the war work, and there I connected. I had a very good job. In 1941, when Pearl Harbor happened, I sent a letter to my draft board to find out what my status was. I found out immediately. I immediately got a notice that you have been selected. I keep wondering sometimes whether I should have ever sent that letter. From there I was drafted, I was sent to Camp Upton, where I was written up in the U.S. Army. I enlisted for the infantry. I did my basic training in the South. I was assigned to the 45th Division Message Center Unit, 157th Battalion. And there I stayed until I finished our training, and we were set to go overseas. About that time, the word came, we were not going overseas. And also I noticed on the bulletin boards that they were looking for flyers. They wanted pilots, bombardiers, navigators, and all your requirement was that you had 2 years of college, and you could qualify for it. You could pass a 2-year college equivalency test, which I did, fortunately, or unfortunately. Depends on how you figure it. I was transferred from camp, whatever camp it was, to Westover Field in Massachusetts, and there I was sent to the Air Force Academy in San Antonio, Texas. I finished my basic training in San Antonio. I went to primary training where I immediately flunked out. They did not need pilots anymore. So I went with 75% of my class out. Most of us were fortunate enough to qualify for bombardiering or navigating. I chose bombardiering. It was a shorter course. I wanted to get into combat sooner. I finished my course. I was commissioned a lieutenant on December 3rd, 1943. From there, I went to Florida, where we assembled a crew. I was a bombardier of our crew. And I also had a rating as navigator, which in my first missions overseas, I flew more navigation than I did bombardiering. Cut. And then
You're overseas and you flew navigation. Now, when were you assigned to a group?
that was in February of 1944.
Which group?
Well, that was just assigned to go overseas. We weren't assigned until before we got overseas. I was assigned to the 99th Bomb Group, 248th Squadron. I flew 12 missions successfully. On my third one, which was over
13.
Vienna,
13.
I was shot down.
The 13.
I said
You
13.
said third.
On my 13th mission, I was shot down. From there, we actually were hit over Vienna, where a crippled plane made it as far as Yugoslavia. We were very fortunate that we were not jumped by fighters, because being hit and crippled, you're usually a dead duck up there. We made it to Verestein, where I was captured by the Croatians. From the Croatians, I was turned over to the Germans, turned us over to the Hungarians, and then back to the Germans. I had a final interrogation in in Budapest, Hungary. There I was assigned to Stalag Luft 3 POW camp in Germany. And that was on July 26th. I stayed at Stalag Luft 3 until February 28th, when we were suddenly all alerted, and we were evacuated the camp because the Russians at that time were crossing the Oder, which was not far from the camp, and we would have been freed by the Russians, and the Germans wanted to keep all their prisoners as much as they could, whatever purpose they needed us. Now, while in the present camp, our treatment was pretty good. We were very fortunate that we were flyers. Commissioned officers, flyers, were given very good treatment. We had no forced labor, and none of the atrocities that I know of that some of the people had in other camps. We were very fortunate in Stalag Luft 3. Now, when we left Stalag Luft 3, we went to Nuremberg, which was Stammlager 13A, and that was in Nuremberg. Now, we stayed there from February through April. In the beginning of April, they marched us out to Moosburg. That was Stammlager 7A. And there we stayed until we were liberated by Patton's 3rd Division. And that was the end of my POW days. And that time, while we were on the march, once we left Stalag 3, the times were pretty rough. Food was very low, medical care was non-existent, and we survived mostly on our own means. We had fellows that were college students when they came in. There were medical students who took care of our chemical needs, and so on and so forth. Anybody who had a craft, this craft was used at some time in escape methods or anything like that, or any means of survival, any way to increase the use of our rations and whatever materials we could get.
You didn't mention about your parachute not opening.
Well, that's about all I have a little photo here of my family that were in the military from the time they first came over to this country. My father, Mike, who served from 1914 to 1919 during World War I. Myself, who served in the Air Corps from 1943 to 1945. My son, who was a major during the Vietnam War in the artillery, served from 1967 to 1970.
In Korea.
And my granddaughter, who is presently in the military, she serves in the Air Corps as a captain, and she is also married to a captain in the Air Corps. They're both serving in Colorado presently. And that's the history of my family. As myself, the day I was commissioned as second lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force. I was in December 3rd of 1943. And here's a picture of the beginnings of a crew that lasted 13 missions overseas. Now, here I have listed the days as I started to keep a diary of the things that happened that were of importance to me, or that I remembered or had time to put down as close to the time that the occasions occurred. A lot of them is just days and different towns and units we walked through Germany on our marches from Sagan to Nuremberg and to Moosburg, where we were finally liberated by General Patton's Third Army on April 28th of 1945. That's it.
So a picture of the duck on here. You have it right there in your left hand.
Okay, this is the flying duck of Stalag Luft 3. It symbolizes every young fella who went into the Air Corps and wanted to fly a combat mission. That resulted in his incarceration in Stalag 3 when his missions were completed by being shot down and taken prisoner over Europe. This would symbolize any pilot, co-pilot, any gunner, bombardier, whatever, that flew and was taken prisoner and is still alive. Some of the fellows here are listed that I knew in the camp. They came from different states, as we have here. Our co-pilot, Alashakis, he flew 11 missions. He was shot down in his 11. He comes from Massachusetts. Kennard, he comes from California. Pate, he comes from Midland, Texas. And these are all over. Not two, there's no two from any one state in the same crew. They're all from all over the states. Our Thanksgiving menu was a thing of real enjoyment. It consisted of real goodies. We started out in the morning with orange juice, broiled spam, Guyanese potatoes. For lunch, we had Welsh rabbit, Italian spuds, upside down ginger chocolate cake, and coffee. For dinner, we had chicken bouillon, roast turkey, whipped potatoes, Deutschland lettuce, and all the trimmings with more cake and coffee. Of course, these things are all falsified because we had none of these nutrients. We had strictly imitations. The only meat we had was spam. Potatoes were all powdered that we had, and they were saved from weeks before. In fact, all the ingredients of these menus were saved from weeks before. They were not a day's ration or anything like that. And this is the menu. It was made by Harry Goucher. That's it for this.
Can you describe that last mission and what the circumstances led up to it?
Oh, yes. On the last mission, we were shot down on. Our mission was over what was Volkswagen Airdrome in Austria. We flew to the mission, we dropped our bombs, and then in getting off the target, we got hit by flak, and we got hit heavy. We lost 2 engines, 1 engine was on fire. We immediately left the squadron and went out on our own. We tried to unload the ship as much as we could and tried to make our way back to the Adriatic Sea where we could possibly be rescued by the Air Sea Rescue. We were very fortunate. We were not jumped or followed by fighters. We made it as far as Varusdane, Yugoslavia, where the mountains stopped us. We couldn't get any further. And we had to jump at a certain point, which was Varusdane, Yugoslavia. We were, as I jumped, I was next to the last one out of the plane. My chute did not open, so I had to actually claw my chute open. I was fortunate I had a chest chute instead of a back chute. When I jumped, I pulled the handle, and there it stood in my hand, and the pack was still on my chest. I had to claw that open to get it out, and as it popped open, I hit the ground at the same time. A fraction of a second later, and I would have been dead. So that was my gift from God for that day. We were captured by the Croatians, of course, and then turned over to the Germans.
Can you remember any happy moments while you were in service?
Well, happy moments, the happiest moment was when we were liberated. Up to that time, it was misery. But we did a lot of things. We kept active. We did a lot of reading. We did a lot of scheming. We tried out with the guards at every turn. Having a radio in the quarters was a sin. I mean, that was real bad. We had one. We used to pass it from block to block. And we'd befriend some of the ferrets, which were the guards. We called them ferrets. And they would tip us off when there was going to be a barrack search. And that way we were able to keep our equipment moving to places that would be safe instead of being caught with it.
Were there any moments more memorable than others?
Well, most memorable moment was the first letter I got from home, which was in October, which is 3 months after I was shot down. And that was just the time, you know, my family found out that I was still alive. Up to that time, they had no record that I was alive. All it was that I was missing in action. And
The airman your father got. The airman that your father got was the most.
oh yes, and my father got my air medal in New York from the Air Corps, and it was awarded posthumously.
Hmm.
So that was something he of course was very proud, because we're being a soldier himself. And of course the happiest moment of all was when we saw that first GI coming down the block with a rifle across his chest and a tank right behind him. And that was a day of liberation.
I notice you have a family picture there.
Yes, we do. And from myself and my wife, this is what has happened in all those years. There's 26 of us there.
4 children.
We have 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. Yeah. Now my wife was also involved in the war. She was one of those workers, Rosie Derivative, they called her. And she used to operate a machine that manufactured spark plugs for Pratt & Whitney engines.
Do you think she was? Do you think she would sit there and tell us about that?
I think she'd be very happy to.
Why don't we get her?